Which of these two cameras is the better hybrid shooter? The Sony A7C Mark II or the Sony A6700? Well, today we're going to be putting these two cameras head to head. We'll be having a look at the photo and video capabilities of both cameras and also having a look at the things I like and don't like about each of these cameras. Before we get started though, let me know if you can tell which is which in the comments. Camera A was the Sony A6700 and camera B was the Sony A7C Mark II. I just want to say we have two brilliant cameras here, but we also have two very different systems. We have full frame and we have APS-C. As you can see, the sensor on the A7C Mark II is much larger than it is on the A6700. And that's going to give you a wider field of view, but that's not the only difference because there are benefits to both sensors. So if this is your first camera, you might be thinking which system should you go into? Or if you've already got an APS-C camera, is now a good time to switch to full frame? All of that and more will be answered in today's video. So first things first, both cameras share a very similar build quality. They are both small and compact, which is ideal for traveling. The A6700 is slightly smaller and lighter overall, but it's practically unnoticeable. I do prefer the look of the A7C Mark II though, because that silver gives this camera a real nice retro vibe. Both cameras feature the same EVF, which is pretty decent in quality, and they also both have a lovely flippy screen, which is ideal if you want to do a bit of vlogging and look at your own beautiful face, or if you're going to be shooting high up or low down, it's got you covered. Both cameras do feature a single SD card slot, which could be a bit of a downside if you are shooting professionally and like to shoot with redundancy. However, for semi-professionals, enthusiasts or hobbyists, I don't see this being a deal breaker. When comparing these two cameras, there were two key things that actually stood out to me. The first is, despite the Sony A6700 being the smaller camera out of the two, it actually features a larger and more comfortable grip. This was a bit of a surprise to me, as you'd expect the full frame camera to offer a larger grip. Beyond the ergonomics, the Sony A6700 also trumps the A7C Mark II with customizability. You see, the A7C Mark II only has a single customizable button, whilst the A6700 has two. As a result, with the A6700, I am able to use both of those custom buttons to set up my camera more productively for both photo and video shooting. Something I can't actually fully utilize on the Sony A7C Mark II, and it's something I can't really understand. How come the more expensive full frame camera has less custom buttons than the cheaper APS-C camera? And speaking of price, when any of us go out and buy something, we always want good value for money, right? Good bang for buck. And it's here that the A6700 triumphs. Retailing at $1,400, the A6700 is $800 cheaper than the A7C Mark II. And this is why we need to have a look at the differences between these two cameras, because there are things the A6700 does, but this one simply doesn't do. But then there are things this camera does, and this one also does, but maybe not as well. So let's start by looking at the specs offered by both of these cameras to get a better understanding. Starting with the A6700, which is equipped with a 26 megapixel APS-C back illuminated CMOS sensor, whilst the A7C Mark II has a 33 megapixel full frame BSI CMOS sensor. Both cameras are equipped with a Bion XR processor, which provides significant processing power and great dynamic range, and in terms of autofocus, both cameras have the same AI processor. It's a lightning fast AF system that is incredibly robust and reliable. It can target a wide range of subjects with ease, and to put it simply, it's easily the best autofocus that I have ever used on a camera. When it comes to video, both cameras can film 422 10-bit, which means terrific color science and color grading options in post. I'm always using S-Log3 anytime I'm using either of these cameras, and both of them are a breeze and a lot of fun to work with when it comes to color grading. So for filmmakers, both of these are spot on. They're also both equipped with an IBIS system, but the A7C Mark II is actually slightly better here than the A6700, as this has 7 stops compared to 5 stops, which does mean you're going to achieve smoother shots with the A7C Mark II, which can be handy if you're shooting a lot of handheld video. Both cameras are also equipped with an active stabilization mode, which uses electronical stabilization and crops into your image ever so slightly. I think it's like 1.1 times crop. It's nothing. Frame rates and resolution is actually where I'd say the A6700 has an edge over the A7C Mark II. With the A6700, you can film 4K 60 FPS without a crop and 4K 120 in a crop mode. Despite that crop, the footage still looks incredible, and it is amazing that a camera at this price point offers such powerful video specs. Plus, you can film 240 FPS at 1080p. On the other hand, the A7C Mark II unfortunately doesn't even offer 4K 120. It can only do 4K up to 60 FPS, but even that is done with a crop mode, and 1080p can only be done up to 120 FPS. Both of these sensors are downsampled, so with the A7C Mark II, you're getting a 7K image downsampled to 4K up to 30 FPS, and with the A6700, you're getting a 6K image downsampled to 4K up to 60 FPS. Now this does mean you're going to get a slightly sharper image from the A7C Mark II, but unless you're zooming all the way into your footage and putting them side by side, it's near impossible to tell the difference. But interestingly, the Sony A6700 does offer a sharper 4K 60 image compared to the A7C Mark II, and that's because when you go into 4K 60 on this camera, you're shooting at 4K because it's cropping into the sensor, while this one is still giving a full pixel readout. Granted, the A7C Mark II does have the edge over the A6700 when it comes to dynamic range. I think we get an extra stop of dynamic range with the A7C Mark II, and that's mainly down to it being a full frame sensor compared to an APS-C sensor. Now what I'm about to say is quite a strong opinion, but I do feel like the video specs found in the A7C Mark II are quite outdated, but that would make sense because this is a Sony A7 IV just in a smaller compact package, and the A7 IV was released back in 2021. I actually think the video specs that are found in the A6700 are going to be very similar to what is found in the A7 V whenever that is released. Now before we delve any deeper into this video, we have to hit the brakes for a second and address the biggest difference between these two systems, and that's full frame versus APS-C. As previously mentioned, the biggest difference between full frame and APS-C is the physical size of the sensor. Full frame cameras are designed to match the dimensions of the classic 35mm film format and a 36mm by 24mm. In contrast, crop sensor cameras are smaller and are typically 24mm by 16mm. Now, how these sensor sizes impact the background blur and the crop is a topic that often sparks quite heated discussion and confusion. Some argue that if you want more background blur, you should get yourself a full frame camera. Others counter that the effect is essentially the same across both systems. The truth is, on a technical basis, they are the same, but there are some differences that you need to be aware of. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them now because I've actually done a full dedicated video talking about this topic, and if I was to do that now, I'd be here for about another 20 minutes or so, and I don't want to do that to either of us. Now, when it comes to the crop factor, crop sensor cameras typically have a 1.5 times crop, which means that any time you put a lens on the front of an APS-C camera, you have to times that focal length by 1.5 times. So for example, a Sigma 18-50 on an A6700 will have the equivalent focal length of 27 to 75mm, and a 70-200 will be the equivalent of 105 to 300mm. As outlined at the beginning of the video, this means that it's easier to get a wider shot with a full frame camera than it is a APS-C camera, but then it's easier to get a more telephoto shot with an APS-C camera than it is a full frame camera. So if you're someone who is shooting sports or wildlife and you need that extra reach, you might be better off actually looking at an APS-C camera. Another key aspect to look at when comparing full frame and APS-C cameras is low light shooting capabilities. Generally speaking, full frame cameras are always going to perform better most of the time than APS-C cameras in low light. That's just fact. The Sony A7C Mark II has a native ISO that starts at 100 and goes all the way up to 51,200, and that is expandable to 102,400. Whilst the A6700 has a native ISO that starts at 100 and goes all the way up to 32,000, and that is expandable to 204,800. That is an awfully lot of ISO. Natively, the A7C Mark II does have a larger ISO range compared to the A6700, however that doesn't mean APS-C cameras are subpar in low light in comparison. In fact, the A6700 performs remarkably well. I've used it extensively for night photography, and even at high ISO, the noise is impressively controlled. The idea that APS-C cameras struggle in low light shooting conditions stems from older camera models which did indeed face challenges when presented with such scenarios. But with the advancements in sensor technology and noise reduction algorithms, modern APS-C cameras have significantly closed the gap to their full frame counterparts, and the A6700 is a prime example of that. And we can see this when we compare the A7C Mark II's ISO performance against the A6700. Both of them perform fantastically. The A7C Mark II does have the advantage, but the margins between the two are so minute. Also, take into consideration how much I've had to zoom into this image to notice this noise in the first place, and that's an important factor. If you zoom into any image, you're gonna notice noise, but if you look at an image in the way it's intended to be viewed and that noise isn't ruining that experience, then I'd say it's fine. Now, when it comes to the video side of things, both of these cameras do offer a dual native ISO, which is pretty awesome. The A6700's bases being 800 and 2500, and the A7C Mark II being 800 and 3200. So if you find yourself shooting video in less than ideal lighting conditions, you can just bump your ISO to its second base and get a much cleaner image. Now, it would be illegal to compare these two cameras without of course talking about photography. Now, I do have to say straight off the bat, both of these cameras when it comes to photography are impeccable. I have been able to capture so many great shots with both in a multitude of shooting scenarios. So the image quality from both of these cameras is very similar, but what I want to do is I want to see if you guys can actually spot a difference between the two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw some photos on screen and I want you guys to guess which was taken with which camera. So without telling any lies, were you able to notice the difference between these two cameras? Well, if you said A was the A6700, then you were right on the money. And to keep these comparison tests nice and fair, I was using very similar lenses for both systems. I was using the brilliant 18-50 on the A6700, and then I was using the versatile king, that of the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 Mark II on the A7C Mark II. So when it comes to the sensors, both of these are fantastic for capturing photographs, but that's really no surprise because any camera really in the last 5 to 10 years is just great for photography. Burst shooting is where the A6700 has a marginal advantage over the A7C Mark II, as this camera can shoot a maximum of 11 frames per second and this one maxes out at 10. A very small difference, but a difference nevertheless. So really, for photography, there isn't much in it between these two cameras, so what it really comes down to is the lenses. Whilst it's great to see a lighter, smaller, compact hybrid camera from Sony, I still think the A6700 is a better camera for everyday use and travel. And I say that because the APS-C lenses designed for them are smaller, they're lighter, and they are significantly cheaper. And speaking of price, for what you pay for the A7C, you can buy a Sony A6700, a Sigma 18-50, and still have $300 left over that you can use to invest into other essential gear, or put it towards another lens later down the line, or even put it towards a trip away somewhere for a few days. And if you were to buy the A7C Mark II and wanted an equivalent focal length that would be similar to the Sigma 18-50, you'd be looking at the Sigma 24-70, and that's a lens that costs over $1,000, meaning that a setup with the A7C Mark II and a Sigma 24-70 would cost $1,300 more than the Sony A6700 and the Sigma 18-50. And as we've seen throughout today's video, the difference between these two systems is so minute. So you've got to ask yourself, depending on what you are shooting, do you need to spend that extra dosh on the full frame system? So out of these two cameras, I think it's quite obvious that I am leaning more towards the Sony A6700. Don't get me wrong, the A7C Mark II is an impeccable camera and you can do incredible things with it. I mean, it is an A7 IV just in a smaller body. But unlike my Sony A7 IV, which I loved, it was my main workhorse for many years, I don't have those same feelings towards the A7C Mark II. There are aspects that I just don't like with this camera when comparing it directly with the A6700. For instance, the one custom button, the smaller grip, the less powerful video settings, and these might sound like nitpicks, but when you are spending $800 more on a camera, you don't want it to be beaten by an APS-C camera. And I know here on YouTube, I am in the minority by not loving this camera, because a lot of people on YouTube swear by this camera. But all of those same people who swear by this camera, I guarantee will ditch it as soon as the A7 is released. And that also includes me. Now, I only got the A7C Mark II because I accidentally broke my A7 IV and got a payout from my insurance. So I decided to take a risk and go with the A7C Mark II and see what it's about. But I just haven't gelled with it like I've gelled with my A6700, which is one of my all-time favourite cameras. But I also think that's just a great testimony of how high of a bar Sony have been able to make with the A6700. I personally think the A6700 is one of the best hybrid cameras Sony currently offers, and it costs under $1,400. So if you're looking at either of these cameras, my honest recommendation would be to look towards the A6700. But if you are wanting a full frame camera, the best recommendation I can give is to honestly wait. Now, I have no backing for what I'm about to say. I have no affiliations with Sony, but I firmly believe that the Sony A7 IV will be released in 2025. And it would actually make sense because in 2018, the A7 III was released. In 2021, the A7 IV was released, and it's now 2025, and I think we are overdue an upgrade to the mighty A7 IV. So yeah, that is my honest thoughts when comparing these two brilliant cameras. I do think the A6700 is the better choice right now, but it'll be interesting to see if the A7 V does come out this year, and if it does, I wouldn't say the A7C Mark II is the worthwhile investment. It'll be worth investing in the A7 V if you really want a full frame camera. I would like to open up the discussion with you guys in the comments below. If you agree, if you disagree, let me know. But the only thing I ask, if you do disagree with my thoughts and opinions, please keep it respectful and constructive. That's the only thing I ask. I do hope this video has been helpful and insightful. If you do have any other questions though, please again leave them in the comment section below and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as possible. Now, if you want to see a full video breakdown comparing the differences between full frame and APS-C cameras, then definitely click on this video right here. But with all that said and done, until next time, create, explore, and inspire.